I turned 73 on a Tuesday in October, and my children threw me a party I'll never forget, though not for the reasons they intended. The dining room of my own home was filled with people I'd raised, fed, and loved for decades, and not one of them looked me in the eye. Not when they arrived. Not when they sang happy birthday with voices that sounded like they were reading from a script. Not when they cut the cake I didn't even want. They looked at each other, at their phones, at the elaborate decorations my daughter-in-law had insisted on, but never at me. I sat at the head of the table in the chair my late husband Robert built with his own hands 40 years ago, and I felt like a ghost in my own life. That's when I caught the eye of Mr. Harrison, my attorney, who stood quietly by the window with a leather folder tucked under his arm, and something shifted inside me like tectonic plates, finally settling after years of tremors. Let me tell you how I got here, to this moment of crystal clarity, because it didn't happen overnight. It happened in small cuts over many years, the kind that don't bleed much at first but never quite heal. I had 3 children: Michael, the oldest, who worked in finance and wore suits that cost more than my monthly grocery bill; Catherine, my middle child, who married a real estate developer and moved into a house with more bathrooms than people; and David, my youngest, who I'd bailed out of business failures twice and who still called me whenever he needed money. I loved them the way mothers do, which is to say completely, irrationally, and without reservation. Robert and I had built a good life together. He was a contractor, worked with his hands, came home tired but satisfied every evening. We saved money. We bought this house in 1978 when the neighborhood was just starting to develop, and we watched it grow into one of the most desirable areas in the city. We never lived extravagantly, but we were comfortable, more than comfortable, if I'm honest. After Robert died 5 years ago, something changed in my children. At first, I thought it was grief expressing itself strangely, this new attention they paid to my finances, my health, my plans for the future. Michael started asking about my will during Sunday dinners. Catherine would drop by with her husband Preston, and they'd walk through the house like they were appraising it, commenting on how much the neighborhood had changed, how valuable the property had become. David, sweet David with his puppy dog eyes, would tell me about his latest venture, and how he just needed a little capital to get it off the ground, and didn't I want to invest in my own son's dreams? I told myself they were worried about me. I told myself they wanted to make sure I was taken care of. I told myself a lot of things that weren't true, because the truth was too painful to look at directly. The first real crack appeared 8 months ago. I was having coffee with my friend Margaret, and she asked me, very carefully, if I'd thought about protecting my assets. She'd just been through something similar with her own children, she said, and she wished someone had warned her earlier. I laughed it off. My children loved me, they couldn't be circling like vultures waiting for me to die. But Margaret's words planted a seed of doubt that grew roots in the dark soil of small observations I'd been ignoring. Like how Michael had started bringing documents for me to sign, always when I was tired, always explaining them in that fast, talking way that made my head spin. Like how Catherine had suggested, more than once, that I should add her name to my bank accounts, just to make things easier, she said, in case anything happened to me. Like how David had asked if I'd considered selling the house and moving into a senior living facility, somewhere smaller, more manageable, and he knew a real estate agent who could help. I went to see Mr. Harrison on a Wednesday afternoon in March. He'd handled Robert's estate, and I trusted him. I told him about my children's sudden interest in my finances, about the documents Michael kept bringing, about Catherine's suggestions, about David's schemes. Mr. Harrison listened with the kind of attention that made me feel like my concerns weren't silly or paranoid. Then he asked to see the papers I'd signed. I brought them the following week. A stack of documents I'd barely read, trusting my own son to have my best interests at heart. Mr. Harrison went through them slowly, his expression growing darker with each page. When he finally looked up at me, I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach drop. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, using my formal name in that way lawyers do when the news is bad. "These documents have essentially transferred significant control of your assets to your children. You've signed over power of attorney to Michael, added Catherine as joint owner on your primary bank account, and signed a loan for David using your house as collateral. The room tilted. I gripped the arms of the chair and tried to breathe. I hadn't understood what I was signing. Michael had explained them as just precautionary measures and standard estate planning. Catherine had said it was just to make banking easier for me. David had promised the loan was a sure thing and I'd never be liable. I'd trusted them because they were my children, and you're supposed to be able to trust your children. Mr. Harrison's voice was gentle but firm. We need to act quickly, he said. We need to reverse as much of this as possible and protect what's left. I felt like I was drowning, like the air in the office had turned to water. My own children had been systematically positioning themselves to take everything Robert and I had built. They hadn't waited for me to die. They'd started carving up my life while I was still living it. The next few months were a blur of legal maneuvers and careful strategy. Mr. Harrison worked quietly filing paperwork, making calls, building a case. He advised me to act normal, to not let on that I knew what was happening. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, sitting at Sunday dinners while Michael talked about market investments he wanted to make with our money, smiling while Catherine redecorated my living room without asking, because she wanted the house to show better when the time came. Listening to David's excited plans for his new business that would definitely pay me back this time. I felt like I was watching a play where I knew the ending but the actors didn't. Mr. Harrison discovered more than I'd even suspected. Michael had been transferring money from my accounts into investment portfolios in his name. Catherine and Preston had already contacted architects about renovating the house after I moved out. David had defaulted on the loan, and the bank was preparing to foreclose on my home. I cried a lot during those months. I cried for the children I thought I'd raised, who wouldn't do something like this. I cried for Robert, grateful he didn't live to see it. I cried for myself, for being so naive, so trusting, so stupid. But Mr. Harrison told me I wasn't stupid. I was a mother who loved her children, and they had exploited that love. There's a special kind of cruelty in that, he said, and the law does provide remedies. We built our case methodically: evidence of financial elder abuse, documentation of exploitation, proof of fraud and undue influence. The pieces came together like a terrible puzzle I never wanted to see completed. Mr. Harrison filed a lawsuit against all 3 of my children, and froze the contested assets. He negotiated with the bank to halt the foreclosure. He worked with a forensic accountant to trace every dollar that had been taken. And then he suggested something that felt both terrible and necessary. Your birthday is coming up, he said. Let them throw you that party they've been planning. Let them think everything is normal. And I'll be there with everything we need to make this right. So there I sat on that Tuesday in October, surrounded by children who'd stopped seeing me as a person, and started seeing me as an inheritance. They decorated elaborately because they were performing for each other, proving they were the dutiful ones, the caring ones. Catherine had hired a photographer, which should have been touching but felt like documentation for a future narrative. Michael had given a speech about family and legacy that rang hollow as a cracked bell. David had presented me with a painting he'd bought with money he'd borrowed against my house. They sang to me and smiled at me and celebrated me, but they didn't see me. They saw a problem that was taking too long to resolve itself, an obstacle between them and what they felt entitled to. I could see it in their eyes during the brief moments they did glance my way. Not love, not even affection, just impatience and calculation. After the cake was cut and distributed, Michael cleared his throat in that way he did when he was about to present something important. Mom, he said, we have something we need to discuss with you. Catherine and Preston moved closer, flanking me like sentries. David pulled his chair around until they'd formed a semicircle, trapping me at the head of the table. We've been talking, Michael continued, and we think it's time to have a serious conversation about your living situation. I felt my heart hammering but kept my face neutral. Catherine jumped in with her rehearsed compassion voice. Mom, you're not getting any younger, and this house is just too much for you. Preston has found a wonderful assisted living facility, very upscale. You'd have so much company. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. David added his piece. We could sell the house and invest the money for you, make sure you're taken care of. His voice was so sincere, so concerned, so thoroughly false that I wanted to laugh or scream or both. Michael pulled out another document, because of course he did. We just need you to sign a few things, he said. To get the process started. Authorize the sale, transfer the deeds, simple formalities really. He set the papers in front of me and held out a pen. This was it. This was the moment they'd been building toward. The birthday party, just elaborate staging for this final act of betrayal. They'd spent thousands on decorations and cake and a photographer to document their devotion, all to soften me up for this. To make me compliant. To make me sign away the last pieces of my life that they hadn't already claimed. I looked down at the documents, then up at my children's expectant faces. They were still avoiding my eyes, looking at each other. At the papers at some point past my shoulder. That's when I spoke for the first time since they'd started their intervention. I notice none of you have looked at me today, I said quietly. Not really looked at me. You've looked at this house you want to sell. You've looked at each other to coordinate your performance. But you haven't looked at your mother. The room went very still. Michael's professional smile flickered. Mom, don't be dramatic, he started, but I held up my hand. I'm not being dramatic, I said, and my voice was stronger now. I'm being observant. I've been observing a lot lately. I've observed money disappearing from my accounts. I've observed documents I signed under false pretenses. I've observed my own children treating me like an inconvenient obstacle to their inheritance. The color drained from Catherine's face. Mom, what are you talking about, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Preston put his hand on my shoulder, and I saw the flash of fear in his eyes. Oh, he knew. They all knew. I turned to look at Mr. Harrison, who'd been standing quietly by the window this entire time, watching everything. My children followed my gaze and seemed to notice him for the first time. This is Mr. Harrison, my attorney, I said. I invited him to my party. I hope you don't mind. Michael found his voice first, always the quickest to recover. An attorney. Mom, why do you need an attorney at your birthday party? His tone tried for casual but landed on nervous. Mr. Harrison stepped forward, setting his leather folder on the table. Because your mother asked me to be here, he said calmly. And because I have some documents of my own that need to be reviewed. He opened the folder and pulled out a thick stack of papers. Over the past 8 months, he continued, I've been working with Mrs. Patterson to address a serious case of financial elder abuse. My children's faces went through a fascinating progression of emotions, confusion, then recognition, then panic, then anger. I watched it happen like time-lapse photography of a storm system forming. Mr. Harrison continued in his measured lawyer voice. We have documented evidence of systematic financial exploitation, unauthorized transfers of funds, fraudulent use of power of attorney, forgery of signatures, loans taken out under false pretenses using Mrs. Patton's home as collateral without her informed consent. The list goes on. I've filed a comprehensive lawsuit on behalf of my client, and I've already frozen all contested assets. As of this morning, the court has granted temporary restraining orders preventing any of you from accessing your mother's accounts, or attempting to sell her property. Michael shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. This is ridiculous, he shouted. We're her children. We're trying to help her. Mr. Harrison didn't flinch. If you were trying to help her, he said, you wouldn't have forged her signature on 3 separate documents. You wouldn't have transferred over $200,000 from her retirement accounts into your personal investment portfolios. You wouldn't have told her she was signing routine paperwork when you were actually giving yourself unlimited access to her finances. Catherine started crying, but they weren't real tears, just the theatrical kind she'd used since childhood when she wanted sympathy. Mama, how could you do this to us? She sobbed. We're your family. The irony of that statement, coming from her, after everything she'd done, would have been funny if it wasn't so heartbreaking. You're right, I said quietly. You are my family. That's what makes this so devastating. I trusted you because you're my children. I loved you unconditionally. And you used that love as a weapon against me. You didn't see a mother who raised you, who sacrificed for you, who would have given you anything you needed if you'd just been honest. You saw an asset to be liquidated, a problem to be managed. An old woman too stupid to notice what you were doing. David was the only one who didn't seem angry, just defeated. He slumped in his chair, and when he finally spoke, his voice was small. Mom, I'm sorry, I needed the money. The business, I couldn't let it fail. At least his confession had a grain of truth in it, which was more than the other two were offering. I know, David, I said. I know you needed money. But you used my house, the house your father built, as collateral without telling me. You were willing to let me lose my home to save your business. That's not love. That's not family. That's just using someone until there's nothing left. Mr. Harrison placed another document in front of me. This is a revised will, he said. I suggest you sign it now, in front of witnesses. It removes your children as beneficiaries and places your estate in a trust that will go to various charities upon your death. It also explicitly disinherits anyone who has participated in financial abuse against you. I picked up the pen, the same pen Michael had tried to hand me minutes earlier to sign away my life. My hand was steady. I signed my name slowly, clearly, on every page that required a signature. The photographer Catherine had hired was still there, and in a moment of poetic justice I hadn't planned, she captured it all. Me signing the new will. My children's faces as they realized what was happening, the death of their carefully laid plans. When I finished, I set the pen down and looked at my children, really looked at them, maybe for the first time in years. I saw them clearly now, without the distorting lens of maternal love. Michael, always so certain of his intelligence, who thought he was smarter than everyone else. Catherine, who'd married money and forgotten what it meant to earn something. David, weak and perpetually failing, always looking for someone else to solve his problems. These were adults I'd raised, but I couldn't recognize them anymore. You can go now, I said, all of you. This is my house and I want you to leave. But Mom, Catherine started and I cut her off. Don't, I said. Don't call me Mom like it means something. You gave up the right to that word when you decided I was worth more to you dead than alive. Michael tried one more time, straightening his tie like armor. You're making a mistake, he said, trying to regain his authority. You're old, and you're confused, and you're going to regret this. When you're alone in this big house with no one to take care of you, you'll wish you'd listened to us. I smiled, and it felt good to smile genuinely for the first time in months. I'd rather be alone with my dignity, I said, than surrounded by people who see me as a bank account. Mr. Harrison will see you out. Don't come back unless invited, and for the record, I'm not confused at all. I'm clearer now than I've been in years. They left finally, taking their righteous indignation and their shattered plans with them. Preston dragged Catherine out while she sobbed about how ungrateful I was. Michael stormed out with threats about challenging the will. David lingered the longest, looking like he wanted to say something, but in the end, he just left quietly. The house felt bigger once they were gone, but not emptier. If anything, it felt fuller, like I could breathe properly for the first time in years. Mr. Harrison helped me clean up the remains of the party, the decorations that suddenly looked garish, the half-eaten cake that tasted like ashes. We're not done yet, he said as he stacked plates. The lawsuit will take time. They'll probably contest the new will. There will be hearings and depositions and uncomfortable revelations. Are you prepared for that? I nodded. I'm prepared for whatever comes, I said. Because I know who I am now. I'm not their victim. I'm not their meal ticket. I'm just me, and that's enough. The legal battles did come, just as Mr. Harrison predicted. My children hired their own lawyers and fought viciously. They told terrible stories about me, claimed I was senile, incompetent, unduly influenced. They painted themselves as devoted children being manipulated by a predatory attorney. But the evidence didn't lie. The paper trail was clear. The forensic accounting was damning. One by one, their claims fell apart under scrutiny. The judge, a woman about my age who'd probably seen cases like this before, was not sympathetic to their arguments. The final ruling came down 6 months after my birthday party. The court found in my favor on every count. Michael was ordered to return every penny he'd taken, with interest. Catherine lost her claim to any joint accounts. David's loan was declared fraudulent, and my house was free and clear. More than that, The judge included a strongly worded condemnation of their actions in her ruling, calling it a betrayal of the most fundamental family bonds. My children were also ordered to pay my legal fees, which had been substantial. Harrison told me it was one of the most comprehensive victories he'd seen in an elder abuse case. I expected to feel triumphant, but mostly I just felt sad. Sad for the family we could have been. Sad for the children who'd lost their way so completely. Sad for all the years I'd have to live without them in my life. Because that was the reality now. We were done. After the ruling, Michael sent a formal letter through his attorney stating he would comply with the judgment but wanted no further contact. Catherine and Preston moved to another state without saying goodbye. David called once. Late at night, drunk and crying, saying he was sorry, but his sorry was the kind that wanted forgiveness without change, and I didn't have that to give him anymore. I changed my phone number. I updated my security system. I made sure they couldn't just show up at my door. Mr. Harrison had warned me that sometimes, after losing in court, people get desperate or vengeful. But my children didn't come back. They simply erased me from their lives as efficiently as they'd tried to erase my agency over my own life. Margaret asked me once if I regretted it, burning down my relationship with my children to save my dignity and my estate. We were having coffee again, like we'd been that day she'd first warned me. I thought about it, really thought about it. Did I regret protecting myself from people who were hurting me? Did I regret refusing to be a victim? Did I regret standing up for myself even when it meant losing my children? No, I told her. I don't regret it. I regret that it was necessary. I regret raising children who could do such things. I regret not seeing it sooner. But I don't regret saving myself. She squeezed my hand across the table, her eyes bright with tears. Good, she said. Because you deserve better than what they gave you. I've rebuilt my life in the 2 years since that birthday. It's smaller now, quieter, but it's mine. I volunteer at the library twice a week. I've taken up painting, something I always wanted to do but never had time for when I was raising 3 children who'd grow up to betray me. I've made new friends, people who see me as a person, not as a resource. I travel when I want to, modest trips but meaningful ones. I saw the ocean for the first time in 20 years last spring, stood on a beach in Maine and let the wind whip my hair and felt gloriously alive. I've even started dating, if you can call it that, at my age. There's a widower named Frank who comes to the library, and we've had dinner a few times. He makes me laugh. He asks about my life. He looks at me when I talk. It's revolutionary being seen. The house feels different now. Robert's chair is still at the head of the table, but I've redecorated the rest. New curtains, new paint, new memories to replace the old ones. I'm making this space mine in a way it hasn't been since Robert died. Maybe in a way it never was. I've accepted that my children won't be part of my future. They made their choices, and I made mine. I don't spend much time thinking about what they're doing now, whether they've learned anything, whether they ever feel remorse. That's not my burden to carry anymore. I've forgiven myself for trusting them, for being blind to their intentions. I've forgiven myself for the years I lost to their manipulation. What I won't do is forget. Because forgetting would dishonor the hard-won peace I've found. Sometimes, late at night, I do think about them as children. Michael at 6, so proud when he learned to read. Catherine at 8, dancing in the backyard in her favorite dress. David at 5, crying because he'd stepped on a snail by accident. Those children did exist once. I didn't imagine them. But somewhere along the way, they grew into people I don't recognize, people who could look at their mother and see only dollar signs. I mourn those lost children the way I'd mourn anyone who died, because in a sense, they did. The people who took their places might share their names and faces, but they're strangers to me now. Last month, I updated my will again. Everything goes to charity when I die, split between organizations that help abused elders and programs that teach financial literacy. I like the symmetry of that, turning my children's greed into something that helps others. Mr. Harrison handled it all, and when we finished signing the documents, he looked at me with something like pride. "You've come a long way, Mrs. Patterson," he said, "from that first day in my office when you could barely believe what was happening to you." I agreed. I've learned that family isn't always blood. Sometimes family is a lawyer who fights for you when your own children won't. Sometimes family is a friend who warns you to protect yourself. Sometimes family is a widower at the library who brings you coffee exactly the way you like it. Family is who shows up for you, who sees you, who treats you like you matter. And by that definition, I have more family now than I did when my children were still in my life. On my 75th birthday, I had a small party. Just Margaret, Frank, Mr. Harrison and his wife, and a few other friends I've made. We ate cake and laughed and told stories, and everyone looked at me when I spoke. Everyone saw me. It was everything my 73rd birthday wasn't, and I felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. As I blew out the candles, I didn't wish for my children to come back, or for things to be different. I wished for more days like this one, surrounded by people who chose to be there, who wanted to celebrate me as a person, not mourn me as an obstacle. I wished for continued strength to live this life I'd fought so hard to reclaim, and I wished, perhaps selfishly, that my children would someday understand what they'd lost, not in money or inheritance, but in love. They'd traded a mother's unconditional love for financial gain, and ended up with neither. That's the real tragedy of this story. Not what they did to me, but what they did to themselves. When I look back now at that October afternoon, at that moment when I sat surrounded by strangers wearing my children's faces, I see it as the moment I chose myself. I looked at my lawyer instead of my children, and in that look was a decision to survive, to fight, to refuse victimhood, even when the people victimizing me were the ones I'd given life to. It would have been easier to give in, to sign their papers, to let them shuffle me off to some facility, while they divvied up my life. It would have been easier to keep pretending everything was fine, that their love was real, that family meant what I'd always believed it meant. But easy isn't always right, and sometimes the hardest thing you'll ever do is save yourself from the people you love most. I did that. I'm still doing it every day, and while I wouldn't wish this journey on anyone, I can say with absolute certainty that I'm proud of who I've become through it. I'm not a victim. I'm not a fool. I'm not someone who can be used and discarded. I'm a woman who knows her worth, who will protect herself, who understands that love without respect is just manipulation wearing a mask. And I'm finally, after all these years, truly free.